Good morning. Welcome. Whether you're here in the sanctuary with us this morning or enjoying community through a screen, we're glad you're here. A number of years ago, my husband and I joined a large group of friends going to an unusual play. In a house in downtown LA, The play was performed dynamically over the entire house. There were scenes going on simultaneously in different rooms. The audience had to choose to follow the story by following any character in the play as they whisked from one room to a scene in another. You had to choose which character you were following and whether you were going to continue to follow that character or switch to another. The result was that no audience member had the whole story of the play. It wasn't until our large group gathered after the play and could talk about what each of us had seen that we were able to understand the entire arc of the story. It was a pretty amazing experience. The play, like much of all of history in our own lives, illustrated how hard it is to rely solely on your own perspective to get at truth. In our own lives, there's a person who is given to embellishing facts to make a story better. One has to be cautious in investing all your belief in that person's version of anything that happened. Better to have another perspective to add. The stories that make up our history were all taken from someone's perspective. If there's a story of conflict, it's often the winner of that conflict that gets to tell the story from their perspective. If we've been paying attention, the last few years have starkly shown how damaging taking only one dominant point of view can be. We find we need community to share stories, not to find absolute truth, but to find multiple truths that gives us awareness of how to walk justly in the world. Come, let us worship together. We light the chalice this morning for all the stories that dwell within this church, some personal, some community-oriented, some with a long arc, and some that are new. Let us seek out all the stories of our church so that all voices contribute to an understanding of who we are and what we can become.
I boarded the king's ship, now on the beak, now in the waist, the deck, in every cabin. I flamed amazement, now on the beak, now in the waist. I flamed amazement. Sometimes I'd divide and burn in many places, all but mariners plunged in the foaming brine and quit the vessel, then all afar with me, with me, with me, with me, I flamed amazement. The never surfeited sea, the never surfeited sea. The never, never, dong da dong dong da da dong dong da dong dong da da dong dong da dong dong da da dong, full fathom 5 thy father lies. Dun da dun dun da da dun. Of his bones a coral made. Dun da dun dun da da dun. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Dun da dun dun da da dun. Nothing of him that doth fade. Dun da dun dun da da dun. But doth suffer a sea change. Dun da dun dun da da dun. Into something rich and strange. Dun da dun dun da da dun. Sea nymphs owly ring his knell. Hark! Now I hear them. Ding dong bell, ding dong. Ding dong bell, ding dong. Ding dong bell, ding dong bell, ding dong. His tears run down his beard like winter's drops from eaves of reeds. If you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. Your affections would become tender. Mine would, sir, were I human. Mine would, sir, were I human.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Community Church of Santa Monica. I am Sue Bickford, your worship associate for today. We're delighted you have come to connect with us either in our actual sanctuary or in our online sanctuary. The worship team is in the sanctuary and in the garden, and today a few reserved spaces have been taken and are here with us. Some of you may be watching in the comfort of your own space and brand of coffee at home, or you may be in some far-flung location watching in a different time zone. If you're vaccinated and would like to join us in the sanctuary, please make sure to follow the instructions in the weekly announcements or call the church for instructions. It's not a hard process, and today we did not reach capacity. We have just 2 visitors with us. The socially distanced more, the merrier. Wherever you are, welcome to all of you from the many communities across the LA Basin and the United States. We're glad you're here. If you are new to our community, please know that while our building is still closed for larger church services and events, we are still here, and there are many ways to learn about us and become involved. We offer programs to serve the needs of our congregation and to be of service in the larger world, including broad religious exploration and personal development for people of all ages. We also join with other social justice advocates in our community activism that contributes to the community and justice and harmony of our world. Unitarian Universalism is not defined by creed or dogma, but is guided by principles that affirm the worth and dignity of every person and encourage an individual search for truth and meaning. We honor the wonder of existence and believe that we are all connected to each other and to the interdependent web of life. Our beliefs are drawn from scripture and science, nature and philosophy, personal experience, and ancient tradition. We are an open, affirming, and welcoming congregation, diverse in backgrounds, identities, spiritualities, and philosophies of life. We are united in our desire to create an inclusive, beloved community to live the principles of our faith and to serve the wider world. An important step on that journey is acknowledging that our church and the homes of most of our members are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded grounds of the Tongva people who continue to live here and who cared for these lands for thousands of years. We recognize and mourn the often deadly harm inflicted on the indigenous people of this country. We lift up their grace, resilience, and their relationship to these sacred lands. Please read the weekly announcements that come out on Thursday for all the dynamic events going on in the church. This week, you can find out about book groups, meditation, faith in action, and how to share your talents with the UUSM community, among other events. All are a chance to find your way into the community or to stay connected.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery. What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Are we? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going?
El amor es la enseñanza de esta iglesia.
Love is the doctrine of this church.
Buscar la verdad es su sacramento y el servicio es la oración.
The quest for truth is its sacrament and service is its prayer.
Vivir juntos en paz.
To dwell together in peace.
Buscar el conocimiento en la libertad.
To seek knowledge in freedom.
Servir a la humanidad en comunión.
To serve humankind in fellowship.
Así es como convenimos unos a otros.
Thus do we covenant with each other.
Songs of hope and
Good morning. This morning, we're going to be discussing the danger of a single story. Now, that quote was originally made famous by the writer Chimamanda Adichie. Now, she's a Nigerian writer, and she was having a TED Talk where she pretty much said, if you only get one person's version of a story, you are going to completely alter history and not taking into account multiple experiences of one event. There was also a man named Stephen Broadley who wrote an article for a magazine called Wired asking about, well, what happens when something is so big that it contains so many stories, like it's a collective story. Then a single story becomes a different kind of danger. Now, there are actually two instances that I can think of surrounding one event that perfectly illustrate both of their points. The situation is World War II. Now, during World War II, there were two separate problems happening. For the Americans, all of their secret codes were being cracked by the Nazis. Kind of a problem, right? When you're telling garrisons where to be, where food and supplies will be, it's kind of not good if the enemy can crack your code. Now, across the pond in England, they were having the problem of not being able to crack the Nazi codes. The Nazis had this thing called the Enigma machine. The Enigma machine by itself is actually very cool. It generates ciphers, essentially codes that are, until World War II, unbreakable. The war was being lost because messages weren't able to be decoded and messages were being decoded too quickly. And then suddenly, it just completely changed. Suddenly, the Enigma machine had been cracked. Suddenly, Americans were passing messages with no problems. And both governments just kind of said, well, our code breakers were just really good. And that was the story. The single story. For decades and decades and decades. And then something interesting happened. A book came out called The Wind Talkers. And suddenly, there was a new story. So, during World War II, the Americans were looking around going, all right, we've used every language, every numerical system, what do we do? And someone, it is up for debate who, said, what about Indian languages? Today we would never say Indian, but that is actually what they said at the time. And they thought about it and they said, well, yeah, there's no way the Germans would know anything about indigenous languages because at this point in America, indigenous people were forced onto reservations, had their land that they were even given for reservations taken, children were taken from their homes and sent to boarding schools called residential schools, which you may have heard about in the news. There is no way that any part of their culture had gotten outside of America. No way the Germans would know. There were a lot of indigenous people who didn't know their own languages. So, the U.S. government found young men who spoke the Navajo language, paired them with white American GIs, and sent them into World War II. And guess what? It wasn't a matter of one Navajo speaker sends a message to a general. No. It wasn't a code. It wasn't something they could teach people. They just talked to each other using their own language. And they turned the tide of the war. American troops could move with pretty much all freedom. Supplies could get where they needed to go because these young men just talked to each other. But as the war ended, they were sworn to secrecy. They were given none of the medals that the white GIs they'd worked with were given. They weren't even given the benefit of the GI Bill, which was a bunch of things given to men coming back from World War II that helped them go to school and buy houses. In fact, almost every single wind talker went home to a reservation, living in poverty. A lot of them ended up dying. Until somebody decided to tell their story. And suddenly we had a whole new view of how America actually won the war. Now, across the pond, in England, like I said, they had issues with the Nazi Enigma machine. And again, after the war, it was just kind of like, oh, well, we had brilliant code breakers. Well, actually, we came to discover that at Bletchley Park, where all of the big brains worked to break codes, the people who actually cracked the Enigma machine were overwhelmingly women. So when all of the men went off to war, well, most of the men went off to war, women took up lots of jobs. Now, the story that most of us have, we think of Rosie the Riveter building ships or building bombs, etc. But at Bletchley Park, something wildly different happened. Housewives with eidetic memory, or photographic memory. High school girls who solve puzzles and crosswords and have what they call pattern recognition suddenly had jobs. Librarians who just knew a bunch of stuff were all called to work at Bletchley Park. Their brains did all the computing to break codes, and they were led by a man named Alan Turing. Alan Turing was a gay man during a time in which that was punishable with jail time. But nobody ever said that. In fact, much like the Windtalkers, immediately following World War II, the women were sworn to secrecy. They couldn't tell husbands or children that they're the ones who cracked the Nazi Enigma machine. The single story was, the men at Bletchley Park magically broke the Enigma machine. Again, until years later, someone wrote a book because their grandma was like, before I go, I'm telling my story. But her story was lots of women's stories, and so more women started talking, and we discovered how many women of Bletchley Park there were. Alan Turing was even honored with his name on money. Because people decided to tell a story. So when you think about stories that you see on the news, or books that you read, even if the story seems really straightforward, always look for the other stories. Within the stories, underneath the stories, behind the stories. The Windtalkers and the women of Bletchley Park, well, I'd like to think they would smile upon you if you did a little extra legwork. And that are our stories for today. Bye.
Thanks be for these life's holy times, moments of grief, days of delight, triumph and failure intertwine, shaping our vision of the right. Thanks be for these, for birth and death, life in between. The quickened breath, we celebrate life's interval. Thanks be for these, we celebrate. Sing and rejoice, our trust declare. Press all our faith into our fate. Bless now the destiny we share.
Good morning. We share our stories in community. And because our community is dispersed and isolated and separated from one another, sometimes we miss the really important stories. So we encourage you to call the church office because we do have people working there safely. We encourage you to email us to let us know what's going on in your life so that we can celebrate with you, we can pray with you, we can hold you in the light so that we know what's going on in community. Last Saturday in the garden, we had a lovely memorial service for Anne McQueen, a longtime member of this congregation. It was wonderful to see people that I haven't seen for almost 2 years sitting in the congregation, spread out in the garden. It was also wonderful to hear stories about Anne, who I did not know, but who I feel like I know now because of the stories that were told about her. We heard this week that Sherman Newsom, another beloved member of our community, died in September, and we just found out. So many times, like the Pony Express, the stories about our community members are slow in coming. And so it's a double shock. One, why didn't we know? And two, oh my God, they're gone or that happened. So please, please tell us your stories. Keep us informed. A young person in my life this morning called me and said, Aunt Kikanza, am I on your call list? I said, what are you talking about? It was way too early for her to have called me. She said, if something happens to you or when you die, is somebody going to call me and let me know? I said, well, nope, you're not on my call list. She says, well, do you have one? I said, somewhere. So that's at the top of my list now, to make a call list, put it on my refrigerator so people know who to call. Several times this year, I was invited to funerals, and they were funerals of people who had asked me to do services for them, but they had failed to tell their families. So on your call list, make sure you have not only the neighbor and your best sibling and your kids, but also the people in your church community who need to know so that they can prepare the last celebration for you, or so that they can help you as you handle whatever business needs to be handled in emergency and sickness. Pastoral care is what we do. That's what community is for. And we want to do pastoral care, but you've got to let us know. So we don't know all of the joys and sorrows that you are celebrating today, but we hold them in our hearts, and we are mindful. We are mindful of the value and the importance of community. We are mindful of the countless sorrows and losses that we face on a daily basis. We are mindful of the many joys that you share with one another. And we are ever so conscious of how COVID magnifies the grief, the loss, and the joy. And so in this moment, we hold in silence as you offer up your thoughts, your prayers, your meditations for yourselves, for your families, for those who are in our community, as we share together joys and sorrows. We hold you in the light. Our reading this morning is a poem that was written by John Godfrey Saxe. Mr. Saxe died in 1887, so I imagine the poem was written sometime before then, a long time ago. So the words are a little archaic. It has rhyme and rhythm and meter, something we don't see so often today. But it may be a story that's familiar to you. It's called the Elephant Poem. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, the men, not the elephant, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty spear. This wonder of an elephant is very much a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within its hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand, and felt upon the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain to see," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact, who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun upon the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceedingly stiff and strong, though each party was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see Norm and Bev sitting in the sanctuary. And I invite others of you to send a note to the office to let them know that you would like one of these coveted seats in the sanctuary. It's wonderful to be able to talk with real people, not to say that Aubrey and Adran are not real people. They're in the back of the of the sanctuary, and we appreciate the support that they provide. So we had, wow, what an interesting story that Chloe offered to us today. It was several different stories about the Navajo talkers and the code breakers and so many other things. She mentions Chimamanda Adichie, whose TED Talk you can still hear and listen to and see her on the internet. And she talks about the danger of a single story, and she shares how she came to the U.S. She was diminished by stories that people had been telling themselves about who she was. She is highly educated and wealthy and well-spoken woman from Nigeria. She speaks English fluently. But because of the single story Americans have about Africa, they asked her things like, well, how did you learn to speak English so well? Do you wear shoes all the time? Do you find the shoes uncomfortable? Where'd you learn how to cook on a stove? And on and on and on. Single stories reinforce stereotypes, especially if you can say, well, all whatever group you're talking about do this thing. And the thing is something that to you is unfamiliar or undesirable. Or the thing reinforces the storyteller's perceived superiority. For example, I went to a party recently, an outdoor reception, very safe, we're all in masks, with a colleague who was wearing a simple black outfit, tops and pants, and even though she was wearing a name tag that said she was a guest who could write a check, people assumed that she was one of the help. It was pretty awful for her and me because I had invited her and because I had thought better of the people who were at the party. It's so important to avoid a single story about anyone or anything so that we don't make judgments that distort who we are. We are more than the perceptions people have of us. We are more than our labels. No one is all good or all bad. Goodness and badness is determined by perception, by the lens you use, by the part of the elephant that you're touching, by your expectations of how you might intersect with that person or that thing. We've got this thing now called cancel culture that lifts up a single story about a person or a group of people and seeks to obliterate any contradicting story that will often dismiss anyone who offers a narrative that does not support the canceling story. You did something wrong, in my opinion, so nothing you have ever done in your life, and probably nothing your parents ever did, is of value or worth. We cancel you out. We erase you from the planet. Not a great way to build community, to build relationships, or to create a narrative that holds the many truths that we carry. See, anti-bias work is the process of telling stories that help us heal, identifying the stories that are shaping our perceptions and judgment, examining these stories, listening to the stories of others, listening to their experiences, and then retelling the stories that are shaped by the additional threads. Stephen Bradley has a blog called The Power of Community Storytelling. And he says that in changing the way people think, we can change the world. Stories cannot be told by one person alone. Stories touch many people, all of whom have different perspectives and points of view. So social justice work, the heart of UU world, teaches us to look at alternative and additional stories through historical narratives, by acknowledging intersectionalities, by institutional apologies, by memorialization of events, by deconstructing social constructs. So when we tell historical narratives, we get a more complete story. History is told by the winners. So the creation of narratives that include the stories of all the people who were there helps us to get a larger sense of the story. So we want to hear, this is what happened to my people during that time. Don't cancel out a people's story. Add to the story rather than taking down statues because they represent an aspect of history that is harmful or hurtful to you. Put more statues up. Tell the whole story. When we acknowledge intersectionalities of our stories, it makes them more complete. Well, if these were the winners, and these were the losers, and the losers are celebrating these people, there's something else that must have gone on there. What is it? How do these stories intersect? It shines light on blind spots. We were there too. We own a part of the story. Now, public institutional apologies open the door for more storytelling. You will hear in our church services and UU church services across the nation and in other churches and other institutions, they begin the meetings by acknowledging that we stand on land that was stolen from another people. We stand on land that was stolen from another people whose names we don't even know or didn't know. And so the first time you hear it, someone says, well, why'd they do that? Invitation to tell a story. Next time they hear it, they hear the name. Oh, I never heard that name. We didn't learn that in school when they taught us about the Indians. And so on and on and on. Apologizing gives us an opportunity to hear more of the story and for us to say, us, whoever the winners are, I'm sorry that happened. Whoever those who are the witnesses, whoever those who want to bear witness and testify about what happened, I'm sorry we asked you not to tell your story. And so then we memorialize events. Memorializing the events help us to remember the what and the why. So across the nation, last week we had used to be called Armistice Day. Now it's called Veterans Day. But even in the memes of the young people, they have flags, they have pictures of old soldiers, and they have invitation snippets of stories that can be told so that we remember the special events and the ceremonies and the holidays. Let us not forget that it happened. Let us not forget what we learned in the process. It's not just about a day off for work. It's not just about raising another flag. It's not just about lighting another candle. It's about learning the story and how your story connects with that story and how those stories create the construct for who we are and how we are with one another. Deconstructing social constructs like race and gender is important because it involves deleting false narratives and adding new narratives to our stories about others. And this is why we have that construct. We talk about race and we talk about ethnicity because we're afraid of people who were not like us, and we had to make them something that we could otherize. We deconstruct constructs like gender and gender identity and say it's not just this and this, but it's a whole range of identities and perspectives so that we understand the people who are different from us. So that when we say we are welcoming and inclusive, it's not just words in a song or a symbol that we put on the wall. It's something that comes from our hearts and something that invites us to draw closer and to learn something else. Storytelling is a community activity. It's a powerful tool for creating empathy, for facilitating healing and inspiring action. Storytelling provides opportunities to bond and to create community. The check-ins that we do at meetings, the stories told in the listening circles that we had a few years ago, the stories told in right relations meetings, the stories that are told in the small group circles that many of you belong to, all have been opportunities to learn about others and yourself. See, together we tell the story of this church, the story of the people, the story of the ministers, the story of the building, what happened here, who was here, what happened then. Point to a wall, point to a pew, and people like Steve White and Joyce Holman will tell you a story about who was here and what happened in that corner of our church. And then people like Beth Brownlee and Allison Kendall can tell you what's inside the walls and why, and what's underneath the floor and why, and who laid the wiring down and why. And if you ask 4 other people, you will get 4 more different stories. Like the 6 parts of the elephant, each story is a piece of a picture that tell who we are and who the storyteller is. Stories at funerals are fascinating. You may learn someone's real name or hear of a character-shaping event. You will learn things about the person that you hadn't imagined. The stories told will also say a lot about the storyteller. 1 parent, 2 siblings, two completely different relationships, two completely different stories. Through storytelling, people relate to and reflect upon and learn from their lives and those whose stories are part of their lives. The stories that we tell ourselves are the stories that we tell on ourselves, who we are, what we value, what we need to make our worlds tolerable, what we might need to make an event meaningful. By listening not just to the words of the story, but to the emotions underneath the story, you can hear the fear, the pain, the uncertainty that perhaps can only be expressed in anger or in attack. But by listening to the subtext, you will get data that will help you to respond from your heart in a meaningful way. Not shaming and blaming and say, you must speak nicer to me. We want that. But you can first acknowledge, there's pain there. Let me see if I can talk to that. Recognizing there's always more than one story is a good way to mediate conflict. Any one person's story can change the way we think, because to say, I've been telling myself a different story, or I'd like to share a different perspective, will force people to at least admit there's another story. They may not like it, they may not agree with it, but they can't unhear it. Another common problem in relationships is the failure to manage agreement. The failure to manage agreement. It's hard to navigate what feels like impossibly difficult decisions. Everybody wants to belong, no one wants to be hurtful, no one wants to be the one to say the thing that everybody already knows, so we end up not telling the right story, not telling the story at the right time, not telling the real story, not telling the whole story. You must release the idea that there is only one story. If not, then we become like the 6 blind men, walking away, shaking our head at the other people's ignorance. We've got to sit and argue and share, not just to argue about the rightness of our experience. We've got to question and probe and explore with curiosity, go back to where the story began when we were all there on the same page, and then talk to see how the story diverged and why. See, a story is more than just a string of causes and effects. It's more than a way to engage people or structure emotions. It's the basic building block of community. Stories heal and inspire and lead communities to action. Tell the story of how you found this church, how you decided to be a member. Tell the stories of the pastors of this church, how you found them, how they left, why they left. How do these stories connect you to this community? Is there a story about this church that you would like to change? Talk to the people. Listen to their stories. Give up the idea that yours is the only story. The stories we tell and the processes we use to tell them become the glue that holds us together as community, as family. They can also be the wrench that tears us apart. For example, what is a story about yourself or your family that you would like to change? How has learning the rest of a story changed the way you perceive someone? Single stories reinforce single perspectives. Open yourself to listening to and learning from another version of a story you think you know well or you think you don't want to know at all. Beware of the danger of a single story.
We come together for more than ourselves. This month, we share 50% of our offering with Community Services Unlimited Incorporated, a nonprofit addressing critical healthy food and environmental justice issues in South LA. Recent events and the pandemic underscore the extreme inequalities which impact the health and lives of Black and Brown communities in LA. UUSM's Faith in Action Committee has supported the ongoing health and environmental justice efforts of CSU Incorporated to provide healthy, organic food, preventative health services while building community capacity to address issues of unsustainable resources and unequal impact. Community Services Unlimited programs include the Safe Seniors, free medical screening, and most recently, from the ground up, high school internships. Volunteers from our church helped CSU refurbish the Veggie Bus classroom and seed library and remodel CSU's headquarters in the Paul Robeson Community Wellness Center. The center includes a produce market, cafe, catering kitchen, and community center promoting environmental and social justice and health. Please join us in a generous contribution to CSU this November so they can continue their important work to help South LA communities. There are many ways to give. Through our website, uusm.org, by clicking on the Make a Donation button, or by scanning the QR code on your screen with your smartphone. Texting 844-982-0209 on your smartphone with the amount followed by the code GCC for our generous congregation recipient, PLG to make your member pledge, or SLF to contribute to the Spirit Level Foundation grant, which is matching our funds to help pay for the technical renovations and people which have made our Lime Street possible. You can still also make out a check to the church for any of the funding goals. Your generous contributions support the work and communities and work we hold dear and cannot do alone. Thank you.
On December 17, 1903, Bishop Wright of the United Brethren received a telegram from his boys Wilbur and Orville, who'd gotten it into their heads to spend their vacation in a little camp out on the dunes of the North Carolina coast. With a homemade glider, they knocked together themselves, the telegram read. Spend their vacation in a little camp out on the dunes of the North Carolina coast. With a homemade glider, they knocked together themselves a telegram read. The figures were a little wrong, but the fact remains a couple of young bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, had designed and flown for the first time ever a practical airplane.
In those days, flying machines were the big love, all the cracker barrel velocities were they were practical mechanics, cause they needed anything, they built it themselves.
Donkey Hog on the great goals, sandy banks that stretched out the Hatteras Sea. Overhead the coals, swooping turns, fish, huts and cranes, flapping across the salt marshes.
They were alone there and figured out the loose end was as soft as anything they could find to fall in. Take it off again and again from Kill Devil Hill. They learned to fly.
Press, suits, silk, hats, gold, braid, king, czar, crown, prince, crown, jubilated. I released the wire that held the machine to the track. The machine started forward, into the wind. Wilbur ran at the side, holding the wing. The machine started slowly, facing 27 miles when it lifted from the track. Wilbur was able to stay with it until it lifted from the track slowly. The course of the flight up and down was erratic, the first in history of the world. The machine carried a man by his own power into the air, in full flight forward without reduction of speed, landed at a point of time from which it started. When these points had been firmly established, we packed our goods and returned home, knowing that the age of the flying machine had come at last, had come at last. When these points had been firmly established, we packed our goods and returned home, knowing that the age of the flying machine had come at last, had come at last. The age of the flying machine had come at last, had come at last.
Crush it, Dorita.
You too, Carl.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place,
When we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place.
when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell a story from deep inside, and we listen with the love in mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place,
When we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our hearts stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place.
when our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
We want to thank everyone who helped to put this service together. I am particularly grateful for the musicians because that is a language of love for me. It touches my heart, and they continue to raise the bar and bring us music that challenges us and comforts us and lifts us up. So thank you. Great job. Great job. Thanks to the tech people for all that they are doing to make this work. If you have some extra money that you have saved in the last couple of years and want to contribute to adding to the technological savvy and equipment in our sanctuary, it certainly will be appreciated as we work to create these hybrid services that are meaningful for those here in the sanctuary and for those of you who stay home. I invite you to join us in the sanctuary. There are seats here for you. Now, I had suggested that we charge for them $500 a seat. That was voted down. I don't know why, but I bet that if we put a dollar price on them, then, it raises the value a little bit. But come on down. There's room for you. Let us know what your joys and sorrows are so that we can share them with you as part of community. And join us for the Zoom coffee hour. So I have brought my computer. I'll be setting it up in Forbes Hall. There are other laptops around. And so join us, because that is one way that we can continue to engage with one another and to share and grow together. Bev and Norm, a very special thank you to you for coming and being with us fully masked for the whole hour that you are here. Thank you, thank you. This service is over. Our service to the world continues. And so I invite you to go. Go knowing that the world calls you to tell your story and to weave your narrative into the tapestry of this interdependent web of human love that is ours and can be our world. Go in peace, my friends.